If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I will share a surprise story that I have prepared especially for you. Your support is really valuable for the continuation of these stories. The late summer wind moved in dry gusts across the Kansas plains, sending dust curling along the wagon trail where Silas Granger rode, slow and steady. His horses were old and well-trained, responding to the slightest shift of the reins, and the creak of the wagon wheels had become background noise to a man used to solitude. Silas was 51, a farmer by trade, a widower by fate. His hands were calloused, knuckles stiff from years of labor, and his face was weather-worn like cracked leather. Since the fever took his wife 3 winters ago, he hadn't left his homestead much except for supply runs, cattle feed, or the occasional market visit. Today was one of those days. He'd been down to the nearest town, one general store, 2 saloons, and a silent chapel, to barter for flour and kerosene. He wasn't in a hurry to get back, but he wasn't one to linger where he wasn't needed. The wagon rattled as he made the turn past a dried-out riverbed, heading north toward his land. That's when he noticed something off the road, partially hidden behind a line of brush. Wooden beams, torn canvas, a wagon, wrecked and abandoned. No fresh horse tracks, just silence and the faint hiss of wind through grass. He pulled the reins. The horses stopped with a grunt. Silas squinted, scanning the area before stepping down. His boots hit the earth with a dull thud. He approached cautiously, one hand near the rifle slung across the wagon seat. He wasn't nervous, just careful. In these parts, sometimes you found broken wagons because of an accident. Other times, it was ambush. He moved forward quietly, eyes tracking every sound. The wagon had split a front wheel. The axle was bent and half sunk into dry mud. There was no sign of life until he came around the back and saw her. A girl, older than a child, younger than a woman. Skinny, pale. Her hair was tied back in a rushed braid, parts of it loose and hanging in front of her eyes. She sat stiff with her back against the wagon wall, her arms locked tight around the body of a smaller girl, maybe 9 or 10, wrapped in a blanket and not moving. The older girl's eyes locked on Silas the second he came into view. She didn't flinch or cry out. She just stared, tight-lipped and still. He stopped a few feet away, hands visible. "You alone?" he asked, his voice steady. The girl didn't respond. She just nodded once. Barely. Silas crouched slightly, not too close. "She breathing?" Another nod. Slower this time. He took in the scene. The wrecked wagon, broken crates, moldy bread stuffed into a burlap sack nearby, a small canteen tipped over. No sign of livestock. No sign of parents. The older girl had the kind of look that told him she'd been doing everything she could to keep her sister alive, and not much else. He stood up and looked toward the sun. Less than 2 hours of daylight left. It'd take at least that to get back to the homestead. "You got anywhere else to go?" he asked. This time, the girl shook her head. The younger one stirred a little in her arms, but didn't open her eyes. He looked back at his wagon, then at them. He didn't need more mouths to feed. He didn't have much food left himself. But he also wasn't the kind of man who could ride away from something like this and sleep easy. Not after what he'd seen the war do to people. Not after watching his wife waste away, knowing full well what it meant to be helpless. "I've got room in the back," he said. "A roof for the night. Some broth and water. Can't offer more than that." He didn't push. He just turned and walked back toward his wagon, trusting they'd follow if they had the strength. He heard movement behind him, footsteps on gravel, the sound of a small body being lifted. By the time he'd laid a wool blanket down in the bed of the wagon, they were climbing in. The older girl helped her sister settle in first, then climbed in beside her, arms still around the child. Silas said nothing. He climbed up to the driver's seat, gave the reins a soft pull, and they were moving again. The ride was long and silent. Silas kept glancing back, just briefly, enough to check that they were still upright and breathing. The sun dropped low on the horizon, and with it came the chill of evening air. He passed the narrow ridge that marked the start of his land. A simple fence, half finished, and a row of cedar trees on the south side. The house stood at the center, modest and weather-beaten, a barn to the left, and a chicken coop just behind it. Smoke still drifted from the chimney. He'd left the fire going that morning. He was glad he had. He pulled the wagon around the side, climbed down, and moved to the back. The older girl was still watching him closely, though she looked more tired than wary now. "You'll sleep inside. I'll take the barn," he said, his voice flat but not cold. She hesitated, then nodded. He carried the younger one. She was lighter than he expected, fevered, barely conscious, her skin hot under his arms. He laid her down on the bed inside the cabin. The sheets were clean. He hadn't had the heart to change them since his wife passed, but somehow this didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like something necessary. The older girl hovered in the doorway. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the stove, the wash basin, the wooden table, and the single bed. "You can rest," he said. "There's soup on the stove. It ain't much, but it's warm." She stepped inside slowly, her movements deliberate, as if waiting for a trap. He left the door open behind her and moved to ladle out 2 bowls of thin broth. Potatoes, onions, a scrap of salt pork. That's all he had left until he could trade again. They sat at the table. She ate slowly. The little one only managed a few sips before fading back to sleep. He didn't ask their names. He didn't ask where their parents were. That could come later, if it ever came at all. When the girl finished, she stood up awkwardly. "You sleep there with your sister," Silas said. "If you need anything, knock on the barn door." She looked at him for a long moment, half like she didn't trust him, half like she didn't understand why he hadn't tried to take something from her. But she didn't say a word, just nodded. Once, then closed the door gently behind him. Silas stood outside in the cooling air for a long while, staring up at the night sky. He lit a lantern, walked out to the barn, and laid down in the hay. He didn't fall asleep right away. His thoughts lingered on the girl's face, hard, tired, full of questions she didn't ask, and on the child's silence, which felt heavier than anything else. He hadn't gone out that morning looking to save anyone, but by the time the sun rose again, they were already under his roof. The morning broke slow and cold. A thin layer of frost clung to the window pane of the cabin, though it was still only early autumn. Silas Granger stood outside the barn with steam rising from his breath, holding a bucket of water drawn from the well. His hands ached from the chill, and the stiffness in his back reminded him he wasn't young anymore. He didn't mind it. Pain was familiar, predictable. Inside the house, he could hear faint movement, floorboards creaking, the quiet scrape of a chair. That meant the older girl was awake. That was something. He opened the door without knocking. She turned when he stepped in, startled but not panicked. She had set the soup pot back over the fire, carefully adding what little remained of the dried potatoes from the pantry. Her hands moved with purpose. The younger girl still lay in the bed, curled tight, but her breathing sounded more even than last night. That was also something. Silas set the water bucket down near the wash basin. He didn't speak at first. Neither did she. Then, finally, the question came. "Why did you bring us here?" She stood still as she asked it. Her arms hung by her sides, her voice steady, though her face showed how hard she was working to keep it that way. Silas looked at her a moment before answering. "Didn't see anyone else stopping. Figured you didn't have a choice." Her jaw tensed slightly. She looked like someone who wasn't used to being helped. Maybe didn't trust it. "We didn't," she said quietly. "They died 3 days ago. Ma first. Pa the next night. Fever, maybe. Or hunger. I don't know. The wagon will gave out before that. We waited. Nobody stopped." Silas nodded once. He didn't press her for more. Her words had come slow, like something heavy being pushed up a hill. Letting them settle was more important than filling the space between them. "Got some honey in the cupboard," he said, shifting the subject gently. "For her. Might help." The girl gave a small nod and moved to the shelf. Her shoulders dropped a little, not from relief, but from simple exhaustion. He poured himself a tin cup of water and sat by the fire, waiting for her to decide what came next. She didn't ask more questions, but he saw the thoughts flicker behind her eyes. He could tell she was calculating how long they could stay, what he wanted in return, whether she and her sister were safe here. He didn't blame her. The world had taught girls like her not to trust men, especially out here, where law was something that came late and left early. "I'll need your help with chores," he said eventually, still watching the fire. "Not much. Feeding the chickens. bringing in wood. If you're staying, I won't carry you through it. I can work, she replied quickly, too quickly. I've done it before. I know, he said. And he did. There was silence again, but it was different now. Less guarded. After a while, she sat near the bed and brushed her sister's hair with her fingers. The child stirred and made a small sound, something between a whimper and a word. Silas listened closely. What's her name? He asked. Josie, the girl answered. Mine's Lily. He nodded again, filing the names away. That was something else, something true and steady he could carry in his head. Silas, he said, offering his name not as a kindness, but as a fact. Granger. Lily didn't reply, but she heard it. That was enough. Later, they stepped outside together. The sun had climbed higher, taking the edge off the frost. Silas showed her where the feed was kept, how to close the chicken pen, how to stack the woodpile near the house. She didn't speak much, but she paid attention. No wasted movements. No questions unless needed. It reminded him of someone. Not his wife exactly, but the kind of woman who knew how hard life could get and didn't wait for permission to survive it. While they worked, Josie slept. At midday, Silas prepared more broth, this time with a bit of dried corn. Lily coaxed her sister to eat. Josie swallowed 2 spoonfuls before turning her face into Lily's shoulder and falling asleep again. She hasn't said a word since Pa died, Lily said suddenly, not looking at him. She just stopped talking. She'll talk, Silas replied. When she's ready. Lily glanced at him then, and for the first time since they met, she didn't look suspicious. Just tired. Just a girl who wanted her sister to be okay. That night, Silas brought him more firewood and left it near the door. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. The windows glowed with lamplight, and through the curtain he could see Lily brushing out her sister's hair again. Gently, slowly, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. He spent the night in the barn again. Didn't sleep much. Thoughts came and went. Not loud ones. Just steady. What to plant before the frost. Whether the hens would last through winter. Whether he'd need to build another cot if they stayed. If they stayed. The next morning, Lily was already outside when he woke. She'd fed the chickens, started the stove, even tried to sweep the porch. She didn't say much when he walked up, but she handed him a mug of hot water with a pinch of dried mint in it. It wasn't coffee, but it was warm. She stood beside him, silent, as they looked out across the prairie. We'll earn our keep, she said simply. You already are, he replied. Neither of them smiled, but they both stayed. The days began to fall into rhythm, each one shaping the next like furrows behind a plow. Silas rose before dawn and checked the animals. Lily followed soon after without being told and handled small tasks around the cabin, bringing in kindling, heating water, feeding Josie. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need instruction either. There was a kind of mutual understanding between them, an invisible agreement that words could come later, but effort came first. Josie remained quiet, but she was awake more often now. Her fever had passed, though her appetite was weak. Sometimes she sat by the window and stared outside. Sometimes she followed the chickens around the yard in slow circles. And once, without warning, she stood beside Silas in the barn while he forked hay. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, watching the dust rise and fall in the light through the slats. That was fine with him. On the 4th morning, Silas finally asked the question that had lingered unspoken since the wrecked wagon. Where were you headed? He said it quietly while they were working side by side in the field, clearing weeds near the fence line. He didn't turn when he asked. He didn't need to see her face to know the answer mattered. Lily took a long time to respond. She yanked a stubborn root free before she spoke. California, she said. My pa had a cousin there. We never met him. Pa just said it was the last place worth trying. Silas nodded once. That why you left so late in the year? Pa didn't think we had a choice. He lost his job in St. Joseph. Ma got sick. We sold what we had. The wagon wasn't meant for the trail. She paused and stood up straight, brushing dust from her skirt. He was too proud to ask for help. Said we'd make it or we wouldn't. Then he got sick too. We thought maybe he'd recover. He didn't. Just laid down one night and didn't get up again. Her voice didn't crack, but it flattened. Silas listened without interrupting. He understood what pride could cost a man. He also knew what it took for someone to keep going when they were the last one left to carry others. You did right by her, he said after a moment. I don't know, Lily said. I don't feel like I did. You did, Silas said again, firmer. She didn't reply, but the silence that followed felt different. Less like a wait, more like a pause in a conversation that had just begun. That night, Lily asked if she could use some of the flour and lard. Silas agreed. She worked by lamplight, kneading biscuit dough at the small table while Josie watched from her place on the bed. It was the first time the cabin had smelled like something warm and familiar in months. The scent made Silas think of the days before his wife took ill. He didn't mention that. When the biscuits came out of the cast iron pan, slightly burnt on one side, but soft in the middle, Josie reached for one without being prompted. Lily watched her, barely breathing. Josie took a bite. She chewed. Then she looked up at her sister. Can we stay? Josie asked, voice rough from disuse but clear. The question hung in the room. Lily didn't answer her. She just looked over at Silas. He met her gaze. You already are. The next morning, Silas found Lily in the garden bed, turning over dry soil with a hand spade. She was working in silence, but there was something more focused in her expression now, a kind of forward motion. She didn't notice him at first. When she did, she nodded once but kept working. Do you plan to head west still? He asked plainly. She stopped. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. I don't know, she admitted. We don't have money, or a horse, or anyone waiting. Silas looked down at the ground, then back at her. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying you don't have to. She nodded again, but said nothing more. Later that day, while Josie napped and Lily washed linens by the creek, Silas finally visited the grave behind the cabin. The marker was simple, just a flat piece of cedar carved with a name and a date. He hadn't spoken aloud at that spot in months. I'm not replacing you, he said quietly to the wind. But they needed a place, and I couldn't walk past. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper, and he stood there alone while before heading back. That evening, Lily brought in 2 eggs from the coop, cracked them into the pan, and split the small meal 3 ways without being told. She served Josie first, then Silas, then herself. No one said grace. No one needed to. Before turning in, Josie picked up a scrap of fabric and tied it into a doll-like shape. It was crude, no arms, just a body and a head, but she placed it beside her pillow before lying down. She didn't say goodnight, but she looked toward Silas once, just for a moment, before pulling the blanket over her. When the lamp was turned down and the room quiet again, Silas sat on the porch with his coat on, watching the stars. He knew the coming weeks would test them. Winter came hard in these parts, and grief didn't keep a calendar. But they were no longer strangers in the same place. And for the first time in a long while, the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like something was starting again. The weather turned suddenly at the end of the second week. Morning frost thickened, and the wind carried a bite that cut through fabric. Silas noticed the change in the way the chickens huddled near the coop wall and how the horses grew restless before dusk. He stacked more wood inside the cabin without needing to be asked. Lily began sealing gaps in the windows with old cloth and boiled vinegar to clear the air for Josie's lungs. They didn't speak about staying anymore. They just behaved like people who had made up their minds. Josie, still quiet but more alert, started sitting at the table during meals. Her voice hadn't come back entirely, but her presence had. Some mornings, she helped Lily stir the fire back to life or fed the hens by scattering feed from a tin she held in both hands like it was sacred. Silas saw the way she flinched at sudden noises and how she avoided the barn unless Lily was nearby. But he said nothing. Children came back from the dark in their own way. His job was to make sure there was light when they were ready. One night, after dinner, Lily lingered near the hearth while Josie slept. Silas was sharpening a small axe near the window, and the scraping filled the room in a steady rhythm. She was never like this before, Lily said without looking at him. She used to sing, used to run all over the yard back in St. Joseph. She talked too much, always had questions. Silas looked up, waiting. I think she saw more than she understood, Lily added. What happened to Pa? What I had to do after? I tried to keep her out of it. What do you mean? He asked. Lily hesitated. Then, finally, her shoulders tensed before she turned toward him. There was a man. A stranger. When Pa was gone, after Ma died, we were trying to get the wagon wheel fixed, and he offered to help. But he didn't want money. He just wanted us. Silas's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He kept his eyes on hers, letting her speak. I wouldn't let him near Josie. I threatened him with a knife. We left in the dark before he woke. But Josie saw him, saw his hands on me. Her voice flattened at the end. Silas set the axe down, stood, and walked toward the fire. He didn't touch her, just sat near enough to be heard. She's safe here, he said. You both are. Lily looked at him like she was still trying to decide whether that was true. But she didn't argue. The next morning, Lily found Silas outside hammering planks onto a broken section of the barn wall. She stood with her arms crossed, coat pulled tight. Do you need help? He gestured toward the small pile of nails and spare boards. Hold the pieces steady. That's all. They worked without much talk, just the sound of hammering and creaking wood. After an hour, they paused. Silas took off his gloves, flexed his hands, then looked over at her. You're not afraid of work, he said. No, she replied. I'm afraid of what comes after it, sometimes. He nodded slowly. That he understood. That afternoon, Silas decided to hitch up the wagon and ride into town for supplies. The pantry was low, and they needed salt, flour, and kerosene. He hesitated before leaving, standing in the doorway while Lily gathered laundry. You'll be all right here? He asked. Lily looked up. We'll manage. He left her with a rifle, just in case. The town was 2 hours south. He didn't stay long, just enough to trade for what they needed. But even in that short time, the questions began. A few locals noticed the extra sacks in the wagon, the way he asked for women's boots and children's wool. An old shopkeeper squinted at him. You got company now, Granger? Silas didn't answer, just paid and walked out. When he returned near dusk, the cabin was warm and the chimney puffed steady. Josie was at the table coloring in the ash of the hearth with a stick. Lily was pulling fresh biscuits from the stove again. Her expression didn't change much when he stepped inside, but he saw her glance at the rifle, still leaned against the wall, untouched. Everything all right? He asked. Yes, she said simply. No trouble. He handed her the wrapped parcel with the boots inside. Hope they fit. She took it, opened it slowly, then stared down at the dark leather. She didn't say thank you. She just looked up at him with something quieter than gratitude, something more like recognition. That night, after Josie had gone to bed, Lily sat by the fire again. Silas stayed near the door. They didn't speak for a while. Then Lily said something he didn't expect. What was your wife like? He looked into the flames. Took his time answering. Quiet. Smarter than me. Could make bread from nothing and win an argument without raising her voice. Lily smiled for the first time since she arrived. It was small, barely there, but it reached her eyes. She die here? Yeah, he said. Fever. Took her fast. I'm sorry. So was I, he said. Took me 2 years to say anything after. The fire popped. Lily looked at him and nodded once. I don't talk much either, she said. But I notice things. He raised an eyebrow. You always leave a lantern burning, she said, even when you're in the barn. Silas leaned back in his chair, looked at her carefully, then nodded once. That's because I don't believe in sending people to sleep in the dark. The first snow came early that year. It wasn't heavy, just a light covering over the fields and fence posts, but it came with enough wind to turn your ears raw and make you walk faster between buildings. Silas rose before daylight, as always, but paused by the window longer than usual, watching the frost build on the glass from the inside. He didn't mind the cold. What he minded was what it signaled. The work ahead, the tightening of supplies, the decisions that had to be made before the land locked down. By mid-morning, the fire was burning steady, and Lily had already started making broth from the root vegetables Silas had set aside the day before. She moved with more certainty in the cabin now, comfortable, almost automatic. Josie was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a scrap of cloth in her lap, sewing 2 buttons onto a piece of linen with a bent needle. It wasn't a toy, not really, but it gave her something to do, and for Josie, that was progress. Silas stepped inside from the barn, brushing snow from his shoulders. Need to talk about the next couple weeks, he said. Lily looked up from the stove. Is there a problem? Not yet, he answered, but I've lived through 6 winters here. When the snow comes hard, it comes fast. We'll need more firewood, more dried food. If we lose the trail to town, we're on our own until March. Lily didn't flinch. Then we get ready now. Silas nodded. He wasn't offering a warning. He was offering inclusion, something she hadn't been sure of before. They spent that afternoon organizing the root cellar. Lily made a list on scrap paper of what they had and what they didn't. Silas cut meat into thin strips for drying. Josie helped where she could, wrapping cloth bundles, handing jars up from the lower shelves, stacking kindling without being told. At one point, while Lily was checking the potato sacks, she looked over and asked a question that had been building for some time. "Do you have family?" Silas didn't answer right away. He kept wrapping the twine around the jerky strips, tying each one tight before hanging them from a hook on the rafter above. "Had a brother," he said. "Died in the war. Parents gone before that. Never had children. Did you ever want them?" He paused again, then shrugged. "Thought I would. Thought we had time." Lily's eyes lingered on him for a moment, then drifted down toward the floor. "We never had much family either. Pa had a brother somewhere in Illinois, but we never met him. After Ma died, there wasn't anyone else. I guess that's why he tried to get to California. He wanted a fresh start." Silas didn't argue with that logic. He'd heard a lot of men talk about California as if it was a place where the past couldn't follow. He'd never believed that himself. Dirt was dirt, no matter how golden it looked in sunlight. That night, the snow thickened. Silas stepped outside just before dark and watched the flakes come down in slow, deliberate silence. The ground would be covered by morning. He could feel it in his knees. He stayed out longer than necessary, then came back inside and set his boots by the fire. Lily had warm beans and hardtack for supper, adding dried herbs for flavor. Josie ate quietly. She didn't talk much still, but she listened. After the meal, Silas handed Lily a folded piece of cloth from the shelf in the barn, his late wife's old shawl. Thick wool, dark blue. She hesitated. "I can't take this," she said. "It's not mine anymore," Silas replied. She unfolded it slowly, then laid it over Josie's lap before wrapping it around her own shoulders. She didn't thank him, but her hands lingered on the edge of the cloth as if it held more than warmth. Before bed, Silas brought in extra firewood and stacked it near the hearth. "Storm will be worse tomorrow," he said. "We'll lose the sun for a few days. Might need to double up the blankets." "Understood," Lily said. She was different now than she'd been when they arrived. She didn't ask for permission. She just listened, nodded, and did what needed doing. That night, as Lily laid down beside her sister and Silas pulled a wool blanket around his shoulders in the barn, both of them stayed awake longer than usual. Not restless, just aware. A question had begun to form, though neither had spoken it yet. What happens after winter? Not the season, not the cold, but the deeper winter, the kind that came after the survival work was done. When the food was stored, the fire stacked, and the days grew shorter than the nights. When there was time to think again, and the quiet got louder. Lily wasn't sure if she'd been taken in, or if she'd made herself part of the place. Silas wasn't sure if offering safety had become something else, something closer, something permanent. They didn't speak it out loud, but they both thought it. And outside, the snow kept falling. Not heavy, just steady, enough to remind them what they were building had a hold. The storm came down harder than expected. By the second day, the world beyond the cabin disappeared behind white sheets of snow, and wind pressed against the walls like a warning. Silas had sealed up most of the outer cracks in the years since his wife passed, but the cold still found its way in, crawling along the floorboards and through the window edges. The fire became the center of everything. Where meals were cooked, where Josie curled up to sleep, where Lily sat wrapped in the wool shawl, her face half lit by orange glow. They didn't leave the house for 2 full days. The chickens huddled in the coop. The livestock stayed in the barn with a layer of straw thick enough to keep them standing through the cold. Silas checked on them once a day, face wrapped in cloth, boots thick with ice, and returned each time without complaint. He never spoke of discomfort, never asked for help. But Lily saw the stiffness in his walk, the raw red on his hands when he pulled off his gloves. She didn't say anything either. She just started heating water before he returned, laying out dry clothes near the hearth, leaving them without ceremony. By the third evening, something shifted. Josie began humming. It wasn't a full song, just a slow, steady hum. Something simple, with no words, but unmistakably music. Lily stopped what she was doing and looked over. Silas froze too. No one interrupted. The sound didn't last more than a minute, but it filled the room more than the fire ever could. Josie caught their eyes, startled by the silence afterward. "I'm not scared anymore," she said, almost in a whisper. Lily exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. She stood, walked over, and kissed her sister's forehead. Later that night, after Josie had fallen asleep, Silas poured hot water into a tin cup and handed it to Lily without a word. She accepted it, then sat down in the chair beside the hearth. "Thank you," she said. Silas nodded. She hesitated, then glanced toward him. "Do people talk about you in town?" He gave a short shrug. "Probably. What do they say?" He looked toward the flames. "Some think I went strange after my wife died. Others think I'm just the kind of man who prefers silence." Lily studied him for a moment. "Which one is true?" Silas gave her a tired look. "I think I just got used to not expecting anything from anybody." She nodded once. "Me too." The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It held something, shared understanding, or maybe just the recognition of two people who'd been walking alone for a long time and now found themselves standing still in the same place. There was still work to do. Even snowed in, there were blankets to stitch, wood to split, food to stretch. But that night, something unspoken finally found a place between them. Not closeness, not affection, not yet, but alignment. The next morning, Lily rose early and stoked the fire before Silas even came in from the barn. She'd started to understand the rhythm of his steps, the way the door creaked when he returned, the way he cleared his throat before speaking. "I want to learn to chop wood," she said. Silas looked at her hands, then at the fire. "It's hard work. Dangerous if your swing's raw. I can learn." He studied her for a moment. "All right, after the snow thins." Lily nodded, her voice steady. "I'm not leaving, so I might as well know how to help more." It was the first time she'd said it directly. Not implied, not left in the space between sentences. Silas didn't react much, just returned to his seat near the hearth and picked up his coffee tin. But she noticed the way his shoulders lowered slightly, like a weight had shifted. By midday, the wind eased. The snow had covered the fence line, but the worst was over. Josie helped sweep the ash and rearrange the dried herbs in the pantry. She was beginning to act more like a child again, light on her feet, occasionally talking to the chickens through the window. Then Lily asked a question Silas hadn't expected. "Did you ever fall in love with your wife? Or did it just happen with time?" He sat back, thoughtful. "We married for practical reasons," he said. "We built a life together. No fireworks. But I respected her, admired her, came to care about her in a way that was quieter than most folks think love is supposed to be." Lily nodded slowly. "That's what I hope for," she said. "Not the kind that makes your heart race, just the kind that makes you feel safe." Silas didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Lighter this time, soft enough to sit on the windowsill without melting. The storm had passed. The air was still cold. The land was still quiet. But the people inside the cabin were no longer waiting for spring to start over. They had already begun. By late January, the cabin had settled into something resembling routine. The snow came and went in quiet intervals. Some days, the wind howled across the fields and forced them to stay inside. Other days, the sun returned just long enough to thaw the edges of the fence posts and allow Silas to check the lines for damage. The silence outside was wide, but inside the house, there was movement, warmth, and the sound of life returning to Oldwood. Josie talked now. Not constantly, not like before, but enough to remind everyone she was no longer stuck inside herself. She asked questions while Lily boiled broth, about animals, about spring, about when they might go to town. Silas answered in his usual brief way, but he made sure to answer. That mattered. Lily had grown stronger. Her hands were rougher now, her posture straighter. She split logs, cleaned tools, patched seams without complaint. She had learned to shovel the path in measured layers to avoid frostbite in her fingers, and she now made decisions without deferring to Silas first. She didn't ask if she could do something. She simply did it and let her results speak for her. One morning, while they were preparing to hang new strips of dried venison in the cellar, Lily asked something that had been pressing in the background for weeks. "Are we guests here, Silas?" He paused, resting a hand on the cellar door frame. "No," he said simply. "Not anymore." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on him, steady. "Then what are we?" He looked at her carefully. "That depends what you want." Lily didn't respond right away. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted to be sure it came out right. When she finally spoke, her voice was even. "I want something quiet, not temporary, not like the wagon, not like St. Joseph. I want Josie to stay in one place. I want to stay too, if that's something you want." Silas lowered his eyes to the packed dirt floor for a moment, then raised them again. "It is." There wasn't a smile, no embrace, no dramatic moment, just a shift, subtle but permanent, like a door had been opened and neither of them would be closing it. Over the next week, Silas made space in the barn loft for extra supplies. He began clearing a second plot of land to expand the garden come spring. Lily took charge of organizing the root cellar and cleaning the tools. Josie helped Silas sweep the barn, now comfortable enough to be around the horses again. They didn't call it planning, but that's what it was. Every movement pointed toward staying. And yet, there were still questions beneath the surface. One of them came out one evening while the three of them sat around the fire. "Will people talk when they find out we're living here with you?" Lily asked, carefully, as she poured tea into tin cups. "They already talk," Silas said. "But talk doesn't matter much unless it knocks on your door." "And if someone comes?" she asked. Silas didn't hesitate. "Then I deal with it." There was no bravado in the way he said it, just certainty. Lily accepted that, and, maybe more importantly, she believed it. A few days later, Silas found Lily standing at the grave behind the cabin. She had brushed the snow off the wooden marker and was just standing there, shawl wrapped tight around her, staring down. "She was your wife," Lily said as Silas stepped up beside her. "Do you think she would have minded us being here?" "No," Silas said. "She would not have wanted me to rot away alone." Lily glanced at him. "You think you were?" He didn't answer right away. "I think I stopped knowing what to do with myself once she was gone," he said. "Until you two showed up." They stood there a long time before heading back in. Later that evening, Lily brought out a small folded cloth from her satchel, the same one she'd had when they arrived. She opened it, revealing a worn brooch made of brass and dull glass, shaped like a flower. "It was my mother's," she said. "I don't have much else, but it's something." She sat on a shelf near the window, beside Silas's wife's old lantern and Josie's cloth doll. No words were said. It didn't need explaining. It was a gesture, a quiet way of saying, "We belong here now." That night, Lily sat a little closer to Silas by the fire. Josie leaned against her sister, head on her shoulder. The cabin wasn't just a place to wait out the storm anymore. It was a home being built from what was left of other lives. And for the first time in years, Silas didn't dread the stillness of evening. He welcomed it. By early February, the snow had begun to soften. Meltwater trickled down the slopes beside the barn, and the air held a wetness that hinted at thaw. The wind still bit through wool and bone, but the light lingered just a little longer each day, and the birds had begun to return in sharp bursts of sound at dawn. The stillness of winter was giving way to something else. Motion, choices, consequence. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed in small, undeniable ways. Lily had begun sleeping on the cot, near the window, instead of beside Josie. Josie no longer needed someone close to keep the night away. She slept soundly now, arms curled around her cloth doll, feet warm under the quilt Lily had sewn from scraps. Silas noticed the way Lily had begun folding the bedding each morning without being asked, the way she put on water before he even reached the door, the way she looked at the cabin's corners not like a guest, but like someone thinking ahead to spring cleaning. Still, there were questions that hadn't been spoken, details of life not yet decided. What would people think when they returned to town as a family? Would they ever formalize this arrangement? What would happen if Josie called him Pa one day without warning? That morning, Lily brought in the empty wash pail and set it near the hearth. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her hair pulled back in a loose tie, and her boots were caked in wet mud from the first thawing patch near the creek. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. Silas looked up from his stool near the stove. "Go ahead. If something happened to you, if you didn't come back from the barn one day, or if you got sick, what would happen to us?" He didn't answer immediately. It wasn't a question he'd expected, but it made sense. She wasn't the kind to trust blindly. "Not anymore. You'd stay here," he said. "The land's mine. It'd be yours too." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And how would anyone know that?" Silas stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and walked over to the table. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folded paper and a charcoal pencil, and began writing slowly. Lily watched in silence as he scribbled in firm, measured strokes. When he was finished, he handed her the note. It was a statement, clear, legally worded, dated, and signed, that she and Josie had a right to remain on the land, that they were part of the household, that everything left behind was to be theirs in the event of his death. She read it twice. "I don't want anything from you," she said, folding the paper carefully. "But I needed to know we'd be safe." "You are," he said. "But now it's written too." They both understood what that meant. This wasn't charity. It wasn't temporary. It was permanence, not spoken with grand gestures, but signed, witnessed by silence, and folded neatly into place. That night, Josie brought out a box of buttons and sat with Lily near the hearth. She sorted them by size and color, while Lily stitched a new hem into the curtain. Silas carved the handle of a broken ladle, smoothing it down with sanded patience. The room was quiet but full of motion. After Josie went to bed, Lily lingered by the fire. "I used to think I was never going to feel normal again," she said. "After the wagon. After what happened. But this house doesn't feel like something borrowed anymore." Silas looked over. "It's not." They sat that way for a while, letting the warmth do the talking. Later, Lily stood up and looked toward the back room, then back at Silas. "If I move my bedding closer," she said carefully, "would that be all right?" Silas looked at her, not startled, not hesitant. "It'd be more than all right," he said. She nodded, left the room, and returned with her folded blanket. She laid it out near his cot, not beside it, not across the room, just close enough. When she settled in and pulled the quilt up to her chest, she looked toward him. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm here. Not for the night, not for the season, for real." Silas didn't speak, but he reached out and turned the lamp down low, leaving just the amber glow of embers in the hearth. And for the first time since burying his wife, he didn't fall asleep feeling alone. Outside, the snow slowed to a gentle dusting. Inside, the quiet was no longer empty. It was shared. By early March, the thaw had taken hold. The snow was mostly gone, clinging only to the shaded corners of the property and the edge of the hill behind the cabin. The creek ran fuller now, the cold water biting against the rocks. The trees had not yet bloomed, but the air smelled different, damp, alive, ready. The cabin itself felt changed too. The pace inside had slowed from survival to routine. Not rushed, not heavy, just steady. Every day brought small acts that built a quiet kind of life. Josie now woke without needing to be coaxed and went straight to her chores without being told. She'd begun feeding the hens by herself, even naming a few. One was called Sadie, another Boots. She talked to them softly in the mornings. Silas watched her from a distance most days, keeping his hands busy in the barn. But every so often he'd pause and look toward her, as if confirming that she was still here, still healing. And she was. Inside the cabin, Lily had begun taking ownership of the space in visible ways. She rearranged the shelves, sewed new curtains from old fabric, made soap using ash and lard with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She moved comfortably, confidently, and her bedroll had quietly disappeared. Now she and Silas slept side by side, not touching, not tangled, just present. A closeness built not on impulse, but on time. One morning after breakfast, while Josie was outside, Lily set her coffee down and looked directly at Silas. "I know there's no preacher here, and I'm not asking for anything with lace or rings." Silas didn't interrupt. "But I think if I'm going to be here, really here, then I'd like to call myself your wife. And I'd like Josie to know what that means." Silas nodded slowly, absorbing it with quiet weight. "I'd be proud if you did," he said. "We can speak vows here, just between us. That's enough for me." Lily looked down at her hands, then up again. "Then we should do it soon, before planning starts, before things pick up." It was settled just like that. No grand announcements, no invitations, just understanding. That evening, they walked together behind the cabin to the hill where Silas's late wife lay. The ground was muddy from the melt, but dry enough to walk. Silas stood before the grave a moment, then removed his hat. "You were a good woman," he said softly. "I kept this place going as best I could, but I got someone here now who helps me carry it. She's not replacing you, just giving the rest of my life shape again." He fell silent, then stepped back. Lily came forward, carrying a small sprig of dried lavender wrapped in cloth, one of the last pieces from her mother's bag. She set it gently against the wood marker, then stepped beside Silas. That night, when Josie had fallen asleep, Silas and Lily stood in front of the hearth. No witnesses, no ceremony, just hands held gently and promises spoken plainly. "I'll stay with you through work, through cold, through anything we can carry," Lily said. "And I'll make sure there's always something solid beneath your feet," Silas answered. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Their hands stayed clasped until the fire dipped into embers. In the following days, Lily began signing her name in a ledger with Silas's last name. Josie noticed but didn't comment. She simply smiled a little wider and stayed closer to both of them when they walked. One evening, after dinner, Josie asked the question no one had prepared for. "Will we ever leave here? Go west, like we were supposed to?" Silas looked toward Lily. She met his eyes, then turned to Josie. "Not unless we have to," she said. "This is where we landed. And sometimes, that's better than where you meant to go." Josie nodded like she understood, even if only in part. Silas stood and grabbed his coat. "Come help me with the animals." Josie beamed and followed him out. Left alone in the cabin for a moment, Lily looked around the room. It wasn't the house she'd imagined living in when she was a girl. It wasn't polished or grand, but everything inside it, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of boots at the door, the rhythm of quiet footsteps, was real. And it belonged to her now, not just by invitation, but by right. She pulled a quilt over the table, lit the lantern, and began stitching new patches into the knees of Josie's trousers. Outside, she could hear Silas's voice as he talked to Josie about the goats, patient and steady. The wind had quieted. The land was beginning to soften. And soon, the soil would be ready again. Spring arrived in slow, stubborn steps. The snow vanished in patches first, then fully, replaced by thick mud and then the first hints of grass. The trees budded cautiously. The soil, once frozen solid, softened enough for plowing. Silas brought the wagon out from a barn and began checking the harnesses, oiling the worn metal, tightening the ropes. He hadn't used the wagon for hauling in almost a year, but now it was time to turn the land again, start planting. There was more to plant this year, more mouths to feed, but also more hands to help. Lily stood at the fence line that morning with a new bucket in one hand and a list of seed rows in the other. She wore a scarf around her neck to block the dust, and her boots were already caked with mud. She looked settled, grounded, part of the land now, not a visitor, not a guest. She carried herself like someone who had earned her place. Josie had grown taller. The weight had come back to her cheeks. She laughed easily now and followed Silas like a shadow when he worked, asking him small questions about seeds, goats, and wagon wheels. Her voice quiet but sure. And then, one day, she called him Pa. It slipped out naturally, not in a dramatic moment, but in the middle of a sentence. "Pa, do the hens need feeding again before supper?" She didn't look up immediately, didn't even seem to realize what she'd said. Silas paused. Then he answered just as naturally, "They do." And that was it. Nothing more needed to be said. That night, Lily sat beside Silas outside the cabin, watching the horizon glow orange beneath a sky that stretched clear and wide. "I keep thinking about how this all started," she said. "How we were just waiting to die out there. How no one stopped. Then you came." Silas took a slow breath. "I wasn't trying to change anything that day. Just couldn't ride past." "I don't think it was an accident," she said. "I think we were meant to be here. Not in a grand way. Just meant." Silas didn't reply, but he reached for her hand and held it there on his knee. Inside, Josie slept soundly, her doll tucked under one arm. A new quilt Lily had made hung over the back of the chair. The cabin no longer smelled of dust and old grief. It smelled like bread, dried herbs, wood smoke, and something else harder to name. Home. Later, Lily spoke again, her voice quieter now. Do you ever wish for something more? Something different? Silas shook his head. No. I think I spent too long thinking life had to be bigger. But this is honest. This is enough. She leaned against him then. Nothing urgent. Nothing forced. Just contact, simple and warm. The next morning, they buried a time box behind the barn. It was Josie's idea. She'd carve her name and Lily's and Silas's into a small wooden board and placed inside a note. We are here now. We are safe. We are family. Alongside it, she placed the button doll. Lily added her mother's brooch. Silas added a coin his wife had once carried for good luck. They buried it beneath a stone, not as a grave, but as a marker, a quiet way of saying, this is where it changed. This is where it began. When summer arrived, the land was rich and generous. The garden flourished, the hens multiplied, and Silas taught Josie how to saddle a horse. Lily spent long afternoons on the porch mending clothes, watching them in the field, her hands always moving, her eyes never far from the one she loved. No one came looking for them. No letters arrived from California. No questions were asked by townsfolk after one or two quiet visits. And in time, no one remembered that Lily and Josie were ever strangers here. They were simply part of the Granger place, a family that had grown from something broken, built not on promises, but on presence. And they stayed. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. Every single day. From then on. Forever.